Mr. Chair, we are at our start time. I was notified this afternoon one of our members is not going to be here today, so we don't have a quorum. So what I would suggest, if it's okay with the committee members, is that we don't call the meeting to order to start formally, but we will go ahead and have our presentations for the committee members and liaison who are present, and for the public who can see this through City TV or online. And we'll go through our presentations, but it won't necessarily be a formal meeting, and the committee won't take any kind of action. Okay?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Before we start this informational conversation with our staff, I was wondering if you could say a couple words about the Arroyo Burro open space. I've heard from some constituents that there's been some fencing and a stop work order, and several people have inquired. So I was wondering, do you know if that's a city project or what's the status? I saw we had something on the council agenda to hire some consultants yesterday.
Sure. Those things are not related to each other. The answer is that no. The fencing project that is proposed near the new city open space park area is not a city project. It's on private property. A neighbor adjacent to the open space is interested in putting a fence up for privacy and to prevent trespassing onto his property. There's a stop work order because I think the person went forward without the benefit of any permits. In doing so, they removed some vegetation on their own property and on the city property, some of that in the coastal zone. So there's a stop work order that will require them to get permits. I believe, have applied for those permits through the county, which the property borders the city and the county. Their property happens to be in the county, so they're moving forward with permit application with the county, and then they're also going to be getting a permit for revegetation work in the coastal zone portion of the city property. What went to City Council this week is a Creeks Division project. That's some technical studies, so we're doing some surveys and then some hydrological study of the creek area, and then we'll start developing conceptual design for a restoration project along Arroyo Burro in that reach of creek. And while we're on that subject, just a couple weeks ago, we were at City Council with construction and landscaping contract for a restoration project up on another open space parcel further up in the watershed, just above Foothill Road, and have awarded contracts, and we'll be beginning construction probably in the next 2 weeks or so on that restoration project. And I'm hoping to get the committee up there for a site visit in September. So we'll be the committee went up to see the parcel when we originally purchased it, and now we'll go up and see it when it's all torn up in September. And then lastly, I wanted to make an announcement that just this week I received telephone notification from the California Natural Resources Agency that we were awarded a $500,000 River Parkways grant for our Las Positas Creek project. So that brings our grant funding for that project up to $1.5 million. And so we're really excited about that. I haven't received anything in writing, so I wasn't going to say anything, but since you got me started, Lee, there you go.
Before we start our conversation on stormwater management with Mr. Rumbley, I'd like to note that a couple of weeks ago, our former City Council liaison, Councilman Hotchkiss, was asking you whether we'd gotten any major new grants lately, because I guess we were going forward with one project using Measure B money. And as point of reference, I'd also like to note that our current City Council liaison, Councilman Greg Hart, is here for this part of the meeting, and hopefully he'll be able to participate in the conversation. But since this is an informal conversation rather than an official meeting, I want to thank you and your colleagues for your continued support of water quality protection and creek protection and restoration, as seen through the contracts for Barger Canyon and for the consulting study on the lower Arroyo Burro open space. We never take your support for granted, and it's very much appreciated. Yeah. And I guess we have an informational topic for informal conversation on the city's stormwater management program. And we're very fortunate that Mr. Rumbley from the city staff happens to be here for this informal conversation. So I'm hoping if he has anything prepared that he'd be willing to share it with us and with everyone who's watching.
Thank you. Yeah, I do have something prepared. I got a presentation here. And we'll start off by talking about a little background about our stormwater management program. And then we'll get into the 5 major components that make up our stormwater program. So the roots of our program can be traced back to the Federal Clean Water Act. And then the Federal Clean Water Act delegated authority for stormwater regulation to the California State and Regional Water Quality Control Boards. The city's actually had a stormwater discharge permit since 2006, and the Creeks Division provides the overall coordination of that program. But really, it's every city employee that's responsible for making sure that permit requirements are met. And the primary objective of our program is to reduce pollutants discharged to the creeks and ocean through the city's storm drain system. And I've broken it into 5 primary components, and each of these components has requirements that we must take care of every year. So we'll talk about all these, what they entail, and some of the recent requirements we've had and what we have coming up as well. First off, we have construction runoff control. And this is primarily overseen by our Building and Safety Division. And so if you're going to do any type of construction project that has ground disturbance in the city, you're going to need a construction or an erosion and sediment control plan. And depending on how large your project is, you might need a more detailed erosion and sediment control plan. Last year, Building and Safety reviewed 43 plans, 44 very detailed plans. And one of the new requirements that they've been working on is to come up with an inventory of all construction projects that have erosion and sediment control plans. This is so when the regional board comes and does an audit, they can present a list of all projects that they might be interested in seeing that have erosion and sediment control. Here's an example of an erosion and sediment control plan if you're not familiar with one. You can see on there that they've got a concrete washout area. They have an area where they have their dumpster installed, their porta potty. They've got erosion control blankets. They have straw wattles. They have a sediment basin. It's all measures that are designed to keep sediment on site. The next component we'll talk about is illicit discharge detection and elimination. You might have heard IDDE. That's a common acronym for this. But we have a full-time code enforcement officer. He's here with us today, Chris Clark. And he's able to respond to every complaint we get on the same day that we get them. We have a hotline. If you ever see anything in the gutter, 897-2688, and that's Chris's direct line. You can reach him at any time during business hours. Some of the things that we've been working on for this component of our program is one is an inventory of commercial industrial facilities. This is something that the regional board has really become interested in. They want a list of all businesses that might need an industrial discharge permit that don't currently have one. And so each year we have to come up with this list based on city business licenses. We look at city business licenses and their description of their business to see if they might qualify for that. And then we submit that list to the regional board every year for them to investigate whether they actually need one or not. We've also mapped all of our storm drain outfalls. And this is the point where the storm drain system enters the creek or the ocean. And we'll talk more about that later in a different part of our program. Chris has also been training all field staff. He does that every year, and it's so field staff knows what an illicit discharge is, and if they see it, they're able to report it, and then we can follow up on it. We've also got an enforcement response plan now, and our enforcement program has been going on for years, but we didn't have a formal document that details exactly what we do when we get an illicit discharge complaint. So now it's who's responsible for what aspects of illicit discharges and what's done when we respond and how to prevent that from happening in the future. We've got a document like that. Outreach is another component of our program, and we have a full-time outreach coordinator who's also here with us today, Liz Smith. And she's primarily working on presentations in schools, coordinating volunteer opportunities like beach cleanups. And one recent permit requirement is community-based social marketing. And Liz and some other coordinators around the county have chosen to close the poop loop. And that's a appeal to pet owners to clean up after their pets. You might have seen some of the postings at Arroyo Burrow for that. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. And most recently, she's been working on the Creek Man campaign. Here's an example of the bus ad that you might have seen if you've ridden the bus lately. And no, that is not Cameron Benson, as far as I know. And here's the example of Close the Poop Loop. It's at Arroyo Burrow. The fourth of our 5 components that we'll talk about is post-construction. And if you're not familiar with that term, it's kind of jargony. But really what it is, it's the ongoing treatment of stormwater after a construction project's finished. So, when the stormwater falls on a building, what happens to that stormwater? Well, if it's had post-construction requirements installed, that water is going to go to some type of treatment before it goes out to the storm drain system. Some examples can include permeable pavers, bioswales, bioretention systems, and infiltration basins. Now, the triggers for post-construction vary throughout the city. It could be as low as 500 square feet for commercial facilities, multifamily apartments, mixed use, or residences up in the hillside. 500 square feet of new or replaced impervious area. And so that means when you trigger post-construction, when you trigger our highest level of post-construction requirements, it means that you're treating all impervious area on the entire site, not just the project area for the construction permit. So some of the projects you might be familiar with around town that are going to be complying with our highest level of stormwater post-construction treatment: the La Entrada project, the Children's Museum, and the upcoming Cabrillo Pavilion and bathhouse renovation. So most of you are familiar with permeable pavers, but it can never hurt to get a refresher. So instead of stormwater just flowing off of the of hardscape, with permeable pavers, they're designed so the stormwater actually goes between the pavers in an aggregate filled gap. And below each paver is going to be a basin that fills up with stormwater and then will slowly percolate down into the soil. Here's an example of a bioswale. And with bioswales, these are good for areas that have a long, narrow treatment area. So the photo here, we've got a parking lot that stormwater is directed into the bioswale at the top and then will flow at least 100 feet. That's a requirement. If you're going to install a bioswale and that's the only form of treatment, you've got to have at least 100 feet. And so the idea is that there's some amended soil and some of it will percolate down into the ground, but there's also treatment happening as the water flows through the swale with nutrient uptake and other pollutant uptake through the plants and the vegetation. Here's an example of a bioretention planter. This is a BMP BMP is best management practice. We refer to that jargony again, but a treatment measure that we see a lot of and we really like. The idea is that stormwater will enter the bioretention planter, and there's a special type of soil mix, a very sandy soil mix, and it percolates. We want to say 2 feet usually, and then ideally there's a gravel layer below that, so maybe 3 feet of treatment before it actually percolates into the ground. But these are great for commercial facilities that don't have much space. It's kind of hard to make out, but there are 2 downspouts in the background there that from the roof runoff will flow into the planter there. And another option here is if infiltration is not feasible at a site, you can design these with an underdrain, so you can completely line the bottom of this. You're getting 2 feet of treatment, and then you've got like a plastic liner below that. and then like a slotted under drain or a perforated pipe, so the stormwater then flows out to the storm drain after it's treated. The last component of our program that we'll talk about today is water quality monitoring. We have a full-time research coordinator that's unfortunately not here today, but every year she prepares a research and monitoring plan based on the permit requirements or what we're really interested in finding out for water sampling. And so some of the things that are in this year's monitoring plan include dry weather sampling of all outfalls. I mentioned that we've mapped all of our outfalls, but now it's a great time to go out and see if any of those outfalls are flowing. It hasn't rained in a long time, so really nothing should be flowing. And if we do find something, we can trace it back and figure out where it's coming from. Chris is going to have a case study talking about that in his presentation coming up. We've also been doing some increased monitoring of impaired water bodies. We have many creeks in the city that are impaired for bacteria and some with toxicity, and we're hoping that over time we can show that the water quality is getting better and that maybe we can get them delisted someday. One new permit requirement is to have a special study to quantify pollutant load. And this is a permit requirement. We had some flexibility in this, and what we decided to do was to do some sampling at sites where we were going to install permeable pavers. And so we did some baseline monitoring to see what types of pollutants would come off of those sites. And then after we install the permeable pavers, no pollutant should come off because all of the water is going to infiltrate down into the ground. Another permit requirement was to model pollutant load reduction. And the regional board is interested in us determining the total pollutant load that we've been able to reduce for all the types of best management practices that we've installed over the entire city. And so we've got a couple of models that we're looking at this summer by two consultants, and we're trying to figure out which model is best for the city, and then we'll use that one to figure out our total pollutant load reduction. Here's a photo of staff at Alice Keck Park Memorial Garden doing that special study, stormwater sampling. So we recently got audited by the Regional Water Quality Control Board last month. We had about 1 month's notice, and they were really interested in illicit discharge detection and elimination and post-construction. And so they asked us to prepare all of our records regarding enforcement for many years going back, and also about 6 construction projects that they were interested in for large projects in the city. And so during the audit, they didn't focus much on enforcement, but they were really interested in post-construction, and they looked at all of the plans that we had put together. They looked at all the stormwater reports, and then after looking at those plans, they wanted to go out into the field to see that things were actually installed properly. We didn't get any results from the audit. They said they would send us a letter in 2 to 12 months, so we're still waiting on those results. Every year we have to submit an online report through the state's webpage, and the last one we submitted was in October of 2015. I mentioned that the Creeks Division provides overall coordination for the permit. We're also responsible for the reporting. We work with all the divisions to make sure they've met all of their requirements, and we compile that information and then submit that annual report. And the next steps, we're going to be working on the annual report that's due October 15th for year 3. That year ended in June, and our year 4 has started July 1st. And this is year 4 of the 5-year permit. Just some of the requirements. The primary requirement for year 4 is to come up with stormwater pollution and prevention plans for some of the city facilities that we've identified as potential hotspots. So that's what we'll be working on this year. If any of you all have any questions, I'm happy to answer those for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rumley. Before I ask Councilman Hart if he has any questions or observations on the program, for the benefit of the people who are watching this conversation and informal discussion at home, can you explain what the greatest long-term benefit would be for beach and creek and channel water quality from the city's participation in this program, which of course is legally mandated, for all communities. But you've gone through a very extensive list of everything the city is doing and, the agencies we work with, and we're being audited and we're doing contract consulting studies. But, we often hear, okay, what is the long-term benefit or payoff from this? So I don't want to steal any of Chris's thunder, but as long as you're there informally.
I definitely have an opinion about that. Most of what I do for my job is post-construction. I review lots of construction plans, and I think that is going to have the potential biggest benefit. Once we get, there's 27,000 parcels in the city, and I think right now we've probably had 400 of them meet the most stringent post-construction requirements. And eventually, the idea is that every parcel in the city will be complying with post-construction, treating their stormwater before it flows out into the creeks and the ocean. And so I think eventually post-construction is going to be the biggest benefit that comes out of our stormwater management permit. That's my personal opinion. But Cameron, you might have a.
So you're saying the long-term benefit for the community as the program goes on will be cleaner and healthier watersheds, beaches, and the channel where residents and visitors and their pets swim and surf and whatever?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, just to elaborate, Lee, on your point, the benefits to the public in terms of people enjoying the creeks and the ocean here. We've done, obviously the cost of real estate here is high. It's a beautiful community. People want to live here. It's expensive to live here. It's sort of the paradise tax that we all pay to enjoy our time here. Part of that is based on our surveys. Some 95% of the people who live here enjoy the ocean. And they're down at least touching or splashing in the water, if not swimming and surfing, and putting themselves in it. So there's a public health component. There's a kind of a use and enjoyment for people of clean water. There's environmental benefits. So you have wildlife that also enjoys water or can't enjoy the water or can't live in the water if it's polluted or contaminated. There's regulatory benefits as we run into more polluted waters. The city is faced with more and more regulatory requirements that have an expense associated with them that puts us in a position of having to use scarce financial resources for regulatory compliance instead of other things that would provide benefits to the community. Having clean water helps our tourism industry in Santa Barbara, which is an important part of our economy. So there's really a broad range of benefits that come from clean water. And it's important to note that a lot of the things Jim was talking about are focused on the main pollution source here, which is non-point source pollution, meaning it's runoff pollution coming from everywhere. So everybody is part of causing that, and everybody needs to be part of the solution. And they're really small steps people can take, but when everybody does it cumulatively, your benefits are huge. And so we do a lot of outreach. There's a recognition, as people are developing properties, that we don't want contaminated runoff coming off of individual properties, because the cumulative effect when it gets down into the creeks, into the beaches, is significant. So even what's coming off of individual properties is small. It's big in the cumulative effect. So everybody's kind of taking care of their part of Santa Barbara to ensure that on the whole we end up with cleaner water.
Thank you. Were there any other questions? Yeah, and Councilman Hart, did you have any questions? Okay.
I'd just like to say one last thing. These audits that the Water Board does, they're random audits, it seems like they randomly happen exactly every 5 years for us in June. But I just wanted to acknowledge Jim Rumbley for his work on that. As he said, we were notified about a month before the audit, and then about a week before the actual audit was going to take place, where they come down here. We were basically given a significant document production list, and Jim and to some extent Chris, because they were looking at the enforcement part of our permit as well, needed to pull together a large volume of documents, really technical information, and know it well enough to be able to talk through. So Jim worked with our building and safety division and our planning division, who were also part of the audit, and was able to get the information together and put a nice presentation together. As he said, we don't have the results of that yet. They gave us sort of a verbal, they gave us some verbal feedback at the end. They were very impressed and satisfied with our enforcement program, and there, I think, will be some issues with post-construction work. We'll see what they have to say, but that's been a really significant program. The city's been, getting better and better at that over the years, and I think that I hope that the Water Board recognizes that, but we'll see when we get their final report.
Can I ask a question? Did you say which sites you toured with them?
I did not.
Which ones?
Yeah, we looked at the Children's Museum that's under construction. We looked at an apartment complex next to the Arlington that's under construction. So none of the post-construction measures had been installed there yet, but they wanted to go out and see just in case they had. We also looked at the 5 Point Shopping Center and the new Sansom Foothill Triangle project up on Foothill, near Santa Gatas. Yeah. Right, and we looked at the permeable paver project at 620 Laguna as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. As we continue this informal conversation about stormwater management and study protection and audits, I think Jim has kind of teed up part of the diverse and exciting career requirements of Chris Clark, who I hope will join us to lead the second part of the conversation, talking about what inspection and enforcement are like, and what the benefit is for the larger community. And we're very fortunate that Chris Clark happens to be here. So if you have anything prepared to share on that for an informal conversation, we'd be glad to hear it.
Yes, thank you. I do have something prepared for you. Let's see if I've got the mouse working. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to talk about our water quality enforcement program and also go over our creek cleanup program as well. So just a little refresher, the Creeks Division enforces Title 16 of our municipal code. This covers illicit discharges. These are things like construction runoff, wash water from commercial properties, mobile business washing, vehicle leaking, illegal dumping, things of this nature. Basically, if it didn't fall out of the sky, it doesn't belong in the city's storm drain system. So we do have our enforcement line. This is my direct line. If you don't have it, please put it in your phones. And we monitor this during our regular business hours, and our goal is to investigate all reports the same day. Usually it's as soon as we get the call. And I can say for FY16, we had 100% same-day response, which is great. And you can also report water pollution at the city website at sbcreeks.com. And that's great, too, because you can upload photos and things like that, which help us out a lot. So for FY16, this is a breakdown of the sources of our enforcement calls. So we can see FY16 and then the cumulative of the last several years. We're seeing a little bit of an increase from other city staff. And I hope to attribute that to our continued field staff training program that we do every year, and we continue to get a lot of our responses from city residents as well. So this is a breakdown of the sources of the pollution reports that we get, broken down into several different categories. Residential, construction, and commercial industrial facilities continue to be sort of our leading sources. And we had a total of 168 reports this fiscal year. We've got a few examples. So these are wash water discharges from businesses. One of them is just dumping mop water out the back door. Another one was washing fume vents, and nobody was really paying attention to where all that wash water ended up, which was right out onto the sidewalk and into the street. Pool discharges are seeming to be a more frequent discharge that gets reported. We've been working with our water conservation folks on this as well, since the drought has put in some restrictions on refilling your pool. So we work closely with them and share reports. Construction wash water continues to be an issue. Typically, this is sort of due to carelessness or improper best management practices, things like that. You can see the straw wattle there. It doesn't really help keep it out of the street. And then the other one, actively washing right next to the street. Sediment discharges are another pretty big one. A lot of times this is just from tracking off of construction sites or graded areas. And then also during rainstorms and rain events, inadequate BMPs or lack of BMPs will often result in large amounts of sediment washing off site. Every now and then we also will find something a little more interesting. This is actually in Old Mission Creek. And on a hot day in April, I noticed some tar seeping out of the side of the creek bank. So I went ahead and dug it out to see what was down there. And it turned out to be what appeared to be roofing tar, which had likely been dumped there in the 1970s. There was a 1970s era glass Coca-Cola bottle buried along with it. So that who knows how long exactly that's been down underground. But it seems as the channel's slowly eroding over time, it's revealing more and more from past pollution. And we got that removed right away. So here's a look at our enforcement data for this year. 168 reported violations resulted in 51 notices of violations. 3 citations issued. See, there's sort of a little bit of a downward trend in our numbers, which I hope to be able to attribute to a decrease in actual violations. So hopefully people are getting more educated and our programs are being effective. It's also possible that there could be some drought-related issues where there's just people are being more conscious about water in general. And again, for the last several years, we've been very good about having same-day response to reports. So Jim mentioned this year we had a new permit requirement where annually we will be sampling all flowing outfalls. And this is going to be in specific areas of the city that we've determined as being priority areas. And these need to be conducted during dry weather, so at least 72 hours after the last rain event. So we go ahead and conduct these after the rainy season. So any water that is flowing through outfalls, it's certainly not going to be stormwater. And either it's going to end up being groundwater or it's going to end up being an illicit discharge. So I've got an example of one of the outfalls that we sampled this year. This is located in Mission Creek, just downstream of the Natural History Museum. And this outfall has been flowing for many years, sort of as long as living memory for the division holds. And it's always had a couple of pools underneath the bottom of it because it seems to be flowing pretty much 24 hours a day. And when we tested this water, it actually came back as being very salty, so it has high conductivity. It's high in potassium and surfactants, which is things like detergents and soaps. This is a very large outfall, about 60-inch pipe. It goes way up into the foothills, and there's only about 2 access points to it. So it's very difficult to try to track anything down. But after several weeks and working with our wastewater folks and our streets division, we were able to locate a basement sump at a large residential facility that was pumping water softener brine and also their mop water and their carpet cleaning water that they were dumping into their basement drains. Ended up in their sump, and then the sump pumped the water out into the storm drain pipe. So we've got a picture of their sump tank there. We poured tracing dye into their basement drains, and it showed up in the tank. When we turned the sump on, another staff member down the line was able to see it flowing out into the storm drain. The facility was very responsive in getting that stuff fixed, and they replumbed their water softener, I think, the next day, and they found a new place to dump their mop water. And about 2 or 3 days later, when this picture was taken, we can see that the pools have dried up, and there's no more water flowing out of the outfall. So that was a great one to have. So I'll talk about our illegal dumping and encampment cleanup program. So I go around, and other staff always keep an eye out for trash in the creek, evidence of illegal dumping, transient encampments, these sorts of things. And we also receive reports from other city staff and from residents as well. These sorts of things are difficult to enforce. We usually don't find the responsible party, or we're unable to prove who the responsible party was. But we do work with the local police department, our park rangers, and other law enforcement agencies to try to have enforcement whenever possible. There's several hotspots throughout the city that sort of are the regular areas that have these issues. This is typically a downtown corridor, so Mission Creek along the fish passages, Laguna Creek, and Sycamore Creek near the railroad tracks, down kind of near Dwight Murphy Park, and then Arroyo Burrow at Hope Avenue, and at all of our beaches and lagoons as well. So I'm going to highlight one large cleanup that happened about a month and a half ago now. And this is in Laguna Channel watershed. This is along the railroad tracks between Chase Palm Park and El Estero Water Treatment Facility. There's a very sort of tent city that built up over time there. And in one day, we were able to remove over 5,000 pounds of trash from the drainage in that area. And I've got a short video tour of just part of the encampments there. If I can, can I go back? See if we can get to play. All right. So there's several encampment locations, along with probably at least a dozen just sort of trash piles. And this is now looking back down into the channel. We have to post warnings that we're going to be doing cleanups in these areas so that the occupants have a chance to remove their personal property. It's looking down into the drainage channel. This was an area that we cleaned up in the past, but it sort of dropped off our radar a little bit. Fortunately, wastewater staff alerted us to the growing encampment there, and we were able to get this area completely cleaned in just one day. The contractor did a very good job on that. And then we also found that I need to go back and see how that corn's doing. But again, that was only about half of the total area. Oops. See if I can get, there we go. So again, city policy, we have to post notices that we're going to do a cleanup in an area 48 hours in advance. This gives occupants a chance to remove their belongings. We're not interested in taking their belongings. We're just interested in cleaning things up. And then again, the remaining items left at the location are taken by the contractor. Contractor charges $104 per creek or beach site. We have a new contractor for this fiscal year, and it's only going to be $95 per site, so we're getting a little more bang for our buck now. We had 1,136 sites cleaned up in FY16, resulting in 134,360 pounds of trash removed from our watersheds. Averages about 118 pounds per site. Some of the details of the cleanup, several hundred bicycles, grocery carts, mattresses, clothing items are a very big one. Dumped pieces of furniture get pulled out a lot, and also a lot of instances of feces. And with that, if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Chris. That was really, really informative. Is it possible that the site where you just had the video, that it was concert enthusiasts for the city's fantastic free Thursday afternoon concerts? We're trying to stake out really good listening and viewing sites before the concert.
Well, this cleanup did happen a little bit before the concert series started this year.
Oh.
So they'd definitely be getting the best seats in the house if they're starting that early. But no, these are local transient encampments.
And in terms of the hot spots that you talked about, did I hear right that you were mentioning one on Arroyo Burro between Hope Avenue and Kyrie L? Yes,
there's a recurrent issue in the concrete channel there, and in the drainage that leads underneath the Highway 101, where we have repeated illegal dumping and transient encampments.
Oh, so that promises to add a little excitement and adventure to the frail elderly who are about to move into that neighborhood within the next 15 months. But I guess having you come by every couple of months, will add some conversation and excitement for them at, was it 252 South Hope?
Yeah, that's an area I personally visit at least once a week, and I'm also working with our local law enforcement to step up enforcement of that area.
Yeah. Danielle or Penny, do you have any questions for Chris, as long as he's here? Or, yeah.
Thank you, Chris, for your presentation. Going back to earlier when you were talking about the discharge reports, how are the fines on the citations calculated? And who makes that determination?
The fines for the administrative citations that we issue are standardized. So the initial fine is $200, secondary fine is $250, and I haven't actually issued a third one yet, but I think it stays at about $250.
Those are in the municipal code, and it's sort of a graduated. It steps up the more violations you have within a 12-month period. So the first violation is a notice of violation, and that's there's no fine associated with that. It's an opportunity, it's opportunity for somebody to correct it. A lot of times it's really just an educational opportunity. And then a second violation within a 12-month period starts the administrative fine process. That's a good opportunity just to remind people at home the water that goes out into the streets and into the storm drain system is not treated. So it goes, no matter where you are, whether you live close to a creek or not, if it's gonna get into the storm drain, it's getting into the creek. So the example of the slide with the dye is a good example. That's a ways away from Mission Creek, but that had been flowing for years and years. I mean, a constant flow. I think we estimated at about 1 gallon a minute coming out of that pipe, just all 24/7. And so that's, it's a high salinity. It's the brine from a water softener, and that's going in, and it's something that would not be good for aquatic organisms. That's getting into the creek just constantly. So no matter how far away you are, you want to prevent those contaminants from getting into the storm drain, because then it's on its way to the creek and ocean.
Right. And you can assure everybody that the green dye, even though it looked like nuclear waste from The Simpsons, is also environmentally friendly.
We actually trapped that by putting sandbags in the pipe, down pipe. So we trapped it and sucked it out of the pipe before it got in.
Got it. Thank you.
Councilman Hart, do you have any questions for Chris? Well,
just have one more thing. We, one of the I guess silver linings to the drought for us is it's become easier for us now to identify places where we have water coming out of those pipes. And in the past, we've identified that, but it could be clean groundwater. We have some locations where we have high groundwater in the city, and that groundwater was being pumped into the storm drain, and it's clean, and that's allowed under the municipal code. It's perfectly fine. It actually provides some wildlife habitat by putting that water into the creek. But now we have less and less of that. We don't have a lot of irrigation overspray. People are really doing a much better job conserving water. And so where we do have water coming out of pipes, it's very suspicious and unusual. It gets our attention, and we're really focusing in on using this time now to try to identify those sources, so that once we hopefully have our normal rain water levels restored, we'll have eliminated all those pollution sources from the system. And they're systemic problems, and we found several of them, but it does take a lot of focused work to try to track those down and figure out where it's coming from.
Thank you, Mr. Benson, and thank you, Mr. Carter. That's very, very informative. I was just wondering, since we're having an informal conversation among the public who's here tonight for the meeting and some city staff, whether it would be possible, since I see her here in the audience, if Liz Smith could give us a sneak preview. In a couple months, the city will be participating in Creek Week, and some of these things require volunteers, and some of them are open to the public and tons of fun. And I was wondering if you had any, just off the top of your head, any highlights that you'd want to share kind of as an advanced preview with people watching at home.
Thank you. So our 17th annual Creek Week celebration is coming up Saturday, September 17th through Sunday the 25th, I believe. The 17th is the annual Coastal Cleanup Day, so worldwide event. Cleanups happening everywhere. You can find out more information on the county's website or via sbcreekweek.com, which is our Creek Week website. We also have a Facebook page where I'll be putting up all of the events. That's facebook.com/sbcreekweek. So check those out. We'll be running a full schedule in the Independent the Thursday prior to the event beginning. We'll be having our very popular Land Shark Tour again this year. And just today I received my first event from Environmental Defense Center, so that's on the calendar. And I just sent out the call for events last week, so they'll start rolling in pretty soon, and we'll get them all online. And we hope to see everybody out there at a cleanup or a tour in a couple months.
Yeah, thank you very much, Liz. We're really fortunate that you were here for the informal conversation tonight. At some point, the committee's going to be doing other stuff, and I was wondering if Mr. Benson could informally tell the people here and the people watching from home what kind of noticed official meetings or site visits you see happening with the Creek Committee in the next couple of months, if you just happen to informally know and are able to share that.
Thank you, Lee. Our next meeting of the Creeks Advisory Committee is going to be on August 17th, I believe, which is Wednesday at 5:30. We're going to meet at the Parks and Recreation Administrative Offices at 620 Laguna Street, and we're going to do a site visit over to permeable paver demonstration project that we're installing over on Quarantina Street by Santa Barbara Junior High. And the project is moving along nicely. We're a little bit ahead of schedule right now, but it'll be a great time to get out and see that project because you'll get to see it in a lot of different phases. And that's a location where we're replacing an entire street and sidewalks with permeable pavers. I think it's going to be a beautiful project. One of the blocks of that street has this incredible Italian stone pine canopy, sort of like Anapamu Street does, and it's going to be really neat when we have the pavers in there. So we're going to check that out, and then the following month in September, I don't know the exact date. It'll be the third Wednesday in September. We're going to do another site visit out to our Arroyo Burro restoration project at Barger Canyon, and we'll be seeing that one about mid-project as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, since this isn't a formal meeting, it's an informal conversation, before we individually get up and go our informal ways, were there any last comments or announcements from anyone who's here tonight, or words of wisdom from our esteemed council liaison, Greg Hart? I would like to simply thank the public for joining us for this conversation, and pointing out that of the three of us up here this Friday, one of the youngest of the three is going to be having a birthday, and I'm not going to say who it is, except that obviously it's not me. So I want to informally in this conversation share on behalf of the entire committee and staff happy birthday greetings. And since there's no need to adjourn, I would just thank everyone for coming and wish everyone a good week.